Welcome to SpanReads, not your typical rereads podcast, a 17-shard series where we reread the Cosmere and are giant nerds about it. Unlike the traditional reread style, we won't be going through each book chapter by chapter, but instead looking at different themes in the placement of the books within the wider Cosmere. Each SpanReads series will bring you 4 episodes. The first 3, reactions and retrospectives, character relationships, and magic system use in the story, will be spoilers for that book and prior books in the series. Then we'll cap things off with a full spoiler Cosmere episode. Today, we will be talking about Words of Radiance. Joining me is Mish.
Hi, also firstRainbowRose.
David.
The one and only Windrunner on the internet.
And Joshua.
AKA Jofwu.
And I'm Weiry. This episode will have spoilers for The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance only. So, how was the book?
The best. The best of the 4, unfortunately, for everybody who prefers Oathbringer and Rhythm of War.
So I enjoyed reading Words of Radiance. I was really interested to read it this time because I think it's the one that I have read the least, strangely, because for a long time I would have said it was my favorite. I think Rhythm of War replaced it. And I feel like on this reread, I think that I confirmed that. Like, I still really enjoyed it, but that's kind of where I landed.
Yeah, Words of Radiance was the first major Cosmere release since after I joined the fandom. It is weird looking back on that now, where like when this was the shiny new thing, and now it's buried beneath Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. It's more bedrock foundational at this point.
Oh, for sure.
And I can remember back in the old IRC chat days, live reacting to the end of this book to David. Because I got very excited about the shard spear and very excited about a certain sword that shows up at the end.
Well, who wouldn't? I was such a shard spear hater for like years, but it is like a book that I felt a very similar way about to Ian. Like, I was around for Alloy and I enjoyed Alloy, but this book, Brandon was doing readings. I remember transcribing the first like Eshonai interlude when she's in the abandoned city in Iraq, and I was just freaking out. Like, I can remember that like it was yesterday, just like so excited about this book. And I really feel like it is the one where people always say, kind of jokingly, like Brandon says, oh yes, Way of Kings was going to be the longest book in this series, and they were all going to get subsequently shorter. But it really is a big setup book, and Words of Radiance was a lot of the payoff for that setup, I think, and really kind of let you feel the scope of what Brandon was going for, and just kind of, I think, showed me a lot how quickly he was willing to pay off some of the like promises and like the foreshadowing he'd done, where things that he would say like, oh, he'd give like a little hint, and I'd be like, oh, that'll be like a book 7 thing or something, and it'd be, oh no, this is happening at the end of book 2. Okay. He's going to move stuff along, which I really appreciate.
For me, this is one of the hardest books to read because I come from a history of abuse. So reading Shalon's abuse is really hard. And I remember each time I read it, it gets a little bit easier and easier because I'm a little bit further and further away from that abuse that I was exposed to. But it's funny to look back on reading it because different things stand out from the abuse side at different points of my life. So for me, it's a very different experience reading the flashbacks and then going. One of my favorite scenes is Kaladin, Shalon explaining, yeah, the world sucks. Here's all the reasons why it sucks. And you're right. I wish that nobody knew what that was like. And then she smiled anyway. And just that scene always rips at my heart because when you're in abuse, you want somebody to recognize that you're pulling through anyway. So for me, that's a big part of my reread of this book is not so much Kaladin or anything else. It's that side of the world and how hard it is to read.
Oh yeah, that is a beautiful scene.
Shalon's flashbacks are an absolute highlight to me of this book, and I think they're probably the best flashbacks so far in Stormlight Archive. They don't pack quite as much punch as the ones in Oathbringer. But I think that as a whole, I think that each one is really good. I really enjoy them. I really enjoy Shalon. Looking into her brain, I would say that I don't know that I really paid too much attention to Shalon on my first read of The Way of Kings. Like, I enjoyed her, but she was not a highlight. And when I read Words of Radiance, she became my favorite character. Because she's so good in this book.
Yeah, I from what I've seen, that's a fairly common response, that Words of Radiance made people love Shalon.
And on a reread, that still holds up. She's still, I think, the highlight of the book for me in terms of characters. So.
Oh, absolutely. So I don't remember if we talked about this in Way of Kings SpanReads, but Brandon has talked about how he plots Stormlight books as trilogies, but he has two different ways of doing it. The Way of Kings style, where it's like it's broken up by character, but then there's the Words of Radiance style, where it's like part 1 and 2 are one book, part 3 is one book, and part 4 and 5 is one book. And I really noticed that this book, because getting to the end of part 2, Brandon starts hopping viewpoints like he does at the end of a Brandon book. And it was very exciting. And it's nice to have that spread out through the book.
That is exhausting when you hit the end.
Yeah, I think that's something he's definitely, there's something to be said for the old fashioned Brandon Sanderson climax, but that it's nice when it can be woven into the plot a little more throughout, as opposed to just like needing to put the book down partway through and being like, okay, I'm going to come back to this because there's a lot going on.
I think this book has the best pacing of every Stormlight book, probably. It's just very consistent in, the fun that I'm having. It's a good mix of point of views and a good balance of them. And it keeps moving at a pretty good pace to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I think that there's not like a plot line that I'm not interested in this book. Like, I'm interested in Shalon and the Ghostbloods and her doing her scholarship and her pursuit of the city at the center of the plains. I'm interested in Kaladin exploring his powers and figuring out what's going to go on with his relationship with Dalinar, and kind of learning how to live with that frustration that he has with the Light Eyes. And I mean, Dalinar is given a little less to do in this book, but he was still great and gets to bond the Stormfather in the end. So, works out ultimately.
Yeah, he periodically takes a step back, and then to prepare for being more important, the next book.
He's got his habits, Dalinar.
Yeah. There's nothing quite like when he gets sick.
Yes.
Because he's bonding the shard blade. And they confront Amaram, and it's like, I think you owe him an apology. And Kaladin starts to apologize. It's like, not you. It's like, yes.
That's a phenomenal moment. And to also get played by Dalinar, who is not exactly the sneakiest guy, but he pulls it off.
Well, and just the fun of seeing even Dalinar when he's talking, Tolan first shows up and he's like, I have an idea. And you're like, I know what that idea is.
Oh,
and
yeah.
being able to see those small pieces on rereads is so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that couldn't have happened if we were getting Dalinar viewpoints through that period, because it would just spoil that.
Yeah, it's hard to, if he's walking around with a sword strapped to his back for 5 full days, at some point, it's got to come up.
Yeah.
Well, and it also helps that Kaladin, I think, is in prison during that time, isn't he?
I think so.
Because you don't have Kaladin guarding him to notice the fact that he has a shard blade strapped to his back. So it's a really clever way of obfuscating for the audience what's going on. Is just, you've got Kaladin, and Kaladin in prison is way more interesting than it should be. Like, for a character, I love the fact that you see captivity spren that Axes is going after, and Kaladin just brushes them off like they're nothing, and it's like it's fun to see those callbacks in such small ways.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, it really helps to spice up your prison stay when Wit comes along to tell you a story right in the middle of any part that might drag. That was pretty good. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, Dalinar that's really the only time that Dalinar kind of disappeared from the screen. You're normally seeing him from Kaladin for most of the book,
or from Adolin.
Or from Adolin, yeah.
Adolin has a lot more chapters than I feel like in my memory of this book. He comes up a lot more than I usually think of.
Adolin he's definitely on the supporting character tier. Like he's at the top of it, definitely, compared to anybody else in Stormlight, but he's not one of the main characters. And so he does, as present as he is, fade a little into the background because he's there to show a unique perspective on things, but he's not the one saving the day at the end. He's Kaladin and Shalon.
He's truly a support character because all of his actions are in support of something somebody else is doing. He is doing the duels in support of his dad's attempts to bring down Sadeas. Or he is going out onto the Shattered Plains in support of Shalon's quest to try and get out onto the plane. Or
I agree. I don't know, maybe we can get into this more when we get to the characters parts, but I do think there are at least elements of Adolin that kind of come into where he comes more into his own in this book, where he's able to do what he would rather do. And the whole Sadeas Adolin dynamic, I think, is really interesting. It's something that I always forget about.
So there are a number of reveals in this book. There's the Shard Blades are Spren, which is a great one. But there's also Kaladin killed Shalon's brother, among others. So what are people's favorites?
Interesting question. It's definitely not that Kaladin killed Shalon's brother. I still don't like that.
I think
we can talk about that more later in the full book section, perhaps. But go ahead, Mish.
I think my favorite still is you'd probably prefer this, wouldn't you? And just the simplicity and the cheek of that. And it's such a wait, what moment?
I actually do have a fondness for the Kaladin killed Shalon's brother reveal, because it was a theory that got proposed relatively shortly before the book. At least that's when and it was like, no way, that's not going to happen. And then like reading the theory, it's like, oh wait, that's actually kind of plausible. And then reading the book, and it's like, oh, that's what happened. This makes sense. I like this.
Yeah, it was a crack theory. It'd been floating around, but it's like that internet brain thing where you give a million people like infinite amount of time and like inputs, and eventually they will produce what the actual answer is at some point. And yeah, they were right. I think that mine is ultimately the Dalinar summoning the Shard Blade thing. That was probably my favorite. I don't think you can call Kaladin jumping into the stand for the duel a reveal, really, but that was another highlight. I'll leave that alone.
I think that's probably one of the most universally loved scenes is Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do.
I mean, it's just such a metal line. It's like, it's up there. There are a number of just like short lines in this book that stick in my brain. It's like, Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do. Red carpet once white. Great line. There's a couple things in the listener songs that just run in my head. It's like though broth are we, their meat is men. Like, I love that line.
My favorite reveal, I think, is Shalon pulling out her shard blade against Tin. It's one of those things that to me, like on rereads, it's like so obvious that she has a shard blade. Like, how did I not see this on the very first read? Some people do, but even if you do see that she has one, the moment of her like pulling that out unexpectedly, I love that one.
That is awesome.
It's also really fun when I don't know if this counts as a reveal to the reader exactly, but when she reveals that she has it to Kaladin, that's a fun moment too.
It totally is. And it's doing like the live shard blade things that you're like, wait, what's going on here? Like, it's changing sizes and stuff. It's glowing. And you're like, this does not sound like a normal shard blade.
And it doesn't scream in Kaladin's head, but there's the whole mystery of like, Syl is dead. Like, what's going on here?
Well, and at one point he hears Syl crying and you think, oh, well, that's the missing screaming, not that instead it's a living shard blade.
Brandon does such a good job like keeping that mystery a secret throughout this book and like slowly giving you like little hints, but also little things that mislead you. Like there's just tons of little things that keep that mystery going.
So like I do want to rant a little bit because as great as the shard blades are spread and reveal is, I got spoiled on that in like the days before, like the first few days before Words of Radiance, because somebody edited it into the Coppermind, and I was reviewing that page and like, and I was not happy. I was furious.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, that's fair. I wonder who, whatever. That's odd that happened. Yeah, I guess like for me, that didn't feel like a huge reveal. Like that was like one of like the main theories that had been out there, and Brandon was doing a good job like keeping it from being the obvious answer. But it was one where I was like, okay, this works. Like, of course. Okay.
Another thing I liked in this book that we didn't really get in Way of Kings because the different groups were so separated, and we don't really get going forward because everyone is allies going forward. Whereas here, people are interacting with each other, but they're not sharing secrets yet. Is that there's a lot of things where like you see something from one person's POV that you know about from another person's POV, but like the person you're in is like remarks on it as like, oh, that's weird. Like, what's going on there? It happens very early on when Kaladin is in one of the meetings where Dalinar takes the lock off of Adolin's sword. Elhokar makes a remark and he absently rubs his chest. And Kaladin remarks on it as, well, that's a weird thing to do. But like, we know from the end of Way of Kings that, well, Dalinar kind of curb stomped him and beat up Elhokar, and that's what's happening there. And it's little things like that I really enjoy.
I feel like another more obvious example of that is when I think it might be during the duel or during it's definitely in the dueling arena where Kaladin is there and Scylla's like, "Is that a cryptic? I'll be right back." And she's just like gone for a bit. And she's like, "I swear, there's a cryptic around here."
Yep. Or else like Shalon muttering to herself while they're down in the chasms and she's exploring trying to create the map. And Kaladin remarks as her talking to herself. But it's like, well, we know that that's not quite the case.
Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. Here is another moment that I do love so much that I feel like gets overlooked a lot in this book. And it is when Shalon decides to tell Dalinar that she's a Radiant, and she summons the little image of Yasna in her hand, and they're standing. For some reason, it just sticks in my head, and they're standing out in the pouring rain and the weeping, and Dalinar has like one Oathbringer go off over his head, and he's like, "I've got to go get the cloak." Then Shalon is like, "Absolutely not. Do not go get the cloak."
Yeah, I love that moment for Dalinar because it, like he just needed that so bad. In that moment,
yeah, he was
so good.
Really out on a limb there, and finally he had something to tell him that they were not desperately, like they were not completely screwed.
Yeah, it's kind of a if you build it, they will come. Whereas like the Radiants are coming, you just need to be a place for them to gather.
Another little Dalinar moment. I love it's not long after that. There's a scene where like he hears Stormfather talking to him for the first time, like not in a dream.
Mhm.
And somebody's like, "Are you talking to God?" And he's like, "I guess so."
Another good one too that I always forget about is Roaion's little mini character arc that's kind of occurring in the background, where he's really just always sort of referenced as this coward, and that no one really has any respect for him, like as far back as Way of Kings. But he comes along on the journey, and he's obviously scared throughout it. But he and his men confront Szeth, and they all die. But and he is not well remembered. He does not get referenced a lot later. But he did it. He proved them all wrong.
And Aladar also has like a good arc, because he's kind of the only High Prince that Dalinar goes to visit, that we see Dalinar try to politic with, and all along he's staunchly in Sadeas's camp, and then at the end he shows up to join them on the campaign. It's like he was such a vocal critic because he wanted to be part of it. He just needed to be convinced.
That was a good one. In terms of things that I always forget about, I think that the two ones that always jump out to me are how angry Kaladin is in this book, which I do like, because I do think it would have been jarring for him to go from as ragey as he is towards the Light Eyes in Way of Kings, but like not really able to focus on it because they're in a survival situation. And to get like picked up by one of the most important Light Eyes and be like, well, this guy's great and I'm jumping on board right away. Like that would not really have made sense. And so I really liked seeing him struggle with some of that stuff. And I always hope that Light Eyes, Dark Eyes class stuff will eventually again become relevant to the plot. Or that's getting into future books.
Yeah, Kaladin's anger is definitely valuable to include. Anger is generally viewed as the bad thing in Brandon's books. And sometimes it's justified. You should be angry. Like, Kaladin should be angry.
Yeah.
And he should be allowed to be angry.
Certainly. Yeah. And I think it'd be too easy for Dalinar to be, well, I'm the good Light Eyes, and for it to be like all very simple. And I think Dalinar still doesn't fully understand all of Kaladin's anger, even when he's explaining it to him or when they're debating just before Kaladin goes to prison. And the other thing that I forget about and that I still honestly kind of just don't like is Kaladin and Shalon's like initial like meeting. Like, it was definitely supposed to be like a moment everyone was anticipating, and I could see it being like, oh, it didn't go the way everyone thought, but it just never. I was okay with them not liking each other, but like that was just a little bit of a weird moment for me.
See, I have always loved no apology, boots. See, I love the humor of the scene. So
yeah, and it is a very humorous scene. It is also deeply, deeply problematic in that Shalon is using her privilege to kind of exert control over Kaladin in a not okay way. And it's like, and that gets into the flaws of her character.
We can get into it more. We can get into it more, I guess, talking about Shalon, but I like that. I don't know. I think she's a complicated character that's got some flaws that are.
Oh, yeah, it's a fantastic scene.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I honestly, the thing that bothers me the most is I don't think Kaladin would have taken his boots off. Like I think he just would have been like, no. And so that's really what it comes down to. Is I think he would have been like, I don't have to listen to you. Sorry.
It would definitely be very interesting to see that scene from Kaladin's point of view.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that Kaladin wouldn't do, Kaladin killing Szeth. You guys all read this as it came out, and I did not. So I actually read the revised version of the ending later. I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are on that. I guess for people who don't know, there's a scene at the end of the book where originally Kaladin stabs Szeth with his shard blade. I guess what does he cut? He cuts him through the chest or through the.
Yeah, I think he just like stabs him in the chest. I think. Yeah, I can go get the book out.
Yeah, it's explicitly Kaladin kills Szeth.
Yeah,
versus the Kaladin allows the storm to kill him.
Well, and then so then a year later he revises it where Kaladin cuts through his hand holding the honor blade, and so he drops the blade and he grabs the blade, and then Szeth just sort of lets himself fall through the. Well, I guess he has no choice, but Szeth falls to the storm.
That's a good point. I, on my initial read, was not a big fan of Kaladin killing Szeth, just because it didn't. I don't know. It just didn't quite click for me. I didn't think it was wrong, but I was kind of ambivalent. Although, I mean, like, I'm always down for anybody killing Szeth, so I wasn't that mad about it. I guess I have mixed feelings about like the scale of the revision a little bit. Like, I don't really. That's a bigger change than I personally would like to see. I guess I've kind of gone back and forth over the years how I feel about it, and I do disagree with the argument that I see it made a lot, though, that it's like inherently in violation of Kaladin's like Windrunner-y thing that he does, because, you know, his goal is to protect even those he hates. That's what he's sworn to do. But that doesn't mean that you cannot take a life, that you must protect all of your enemies in all situations. And Kaladin doesn't really know what's going on in that moment, and so he doesn't know that Szeth isn't a threat. He doesn't know anything aside from Syl told him to go for the sword, and he did it. So I just don't think that, maybe if he had all the context and he knew exactly that Szeth was a person in crisis and he had just thrown himself to the winds, he would know exactly what to do. But I don't think he's like, here I am callously deciding that this life isn't worth it.
I don't remember what my initial thoughts were, so you're getting 2022 thoughts, which is, I don't see the functional difference between the two versions, because either way, Kaladin is killing Szeth. Like, falling from the middle of a high storm into a high storm. Do you really think he's going to survive that? No. Like, Kaladin killed him in both versions.
Does he know that he doesn't have powers anymore, though? He doesn't know what an honor blade is, or that his powers stem from that. And so all he knows is Szeth has dropped his blade, and Syl says you need to get it.
No, because earlier in the book, I believe Syl does say, if like his powers don't come from his friend, they come from that sword.
Well, she explains it to him again, at least. That's immediately after that scene. And so I don't think that that's present in Kaladin's mind.
My thoughts on it are, I've always been torn on the retcon, because on the one hand, I don't even know how to explain it. Just on the one hand, Kaladin killing Szeth is a necessary evil, and there's nothing wrong with killing the Parshendi, so why would there be a problem with killing Szeth? Especially when it's in protection of those he needs to protect. But on the other hand, it makes a little bit more sense for Szeth's character arc for him to have died via the storm instead of via Kaladin. And I always took it as it was a retcon not for Kaladin, but for Szeth's arc.
That's interesting. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, I can see that. Ultimately, retcons are a tricky thing, and Brandon's talked about not wanting to Lucas his books. This isn't as bad as that, but
it's as bad as it's been, I would say.
Like, this is
yes.
And like, I think it was a valuable learning experience for him, and that like, maybe I shouldn't have done that.
Can we make Kaladin stab first shirts or something like that?
We absolutely do need to make Kaladin stabbed first.
There's something that can be made of that. I don't know if it's a sticker, I don't know if it's a shirt, but like, there's an idea there. I think the Parshendi is a relevant topic.
Yes, that was very exciting to learn about the listeners.
Yeah,
it's the first time we learn a new name for the species.
Yeah,
it's funny to me now how much like I feel like I take those for granted because they're so much more familiar on a reread, and so it's less foreign, and it's easy to forget how much of it was new information.
Mm-hmm.
Even like as I'm rereading, I started with Way of Kings, and now I'm here. Like it's even then, it's reading it, in order. It's hard to wrap my mind around how much of it was new stuff.
For context, when we record this, we have up through Rhythm of War available for those who read after book 5 or listen after book 5 or whatever. So we have so much more about the listeners and the Parshendi, even if it's a few years out of date, we just have so much more. But back then it was new and exciting, and the listeners and the songs and
I think the forms for me was really the most interesting thing. Just like, and kind of, I think it's always apparent in Stormlight that humans are a little bit at odds with the main ecology of Rashar. I think that the listeners feel like they're at home in the ecology of Rashar in a way, and a part of it in the way that we see chasm fiends pupating in the storms and whatnot. The singers in the same way have a connection to the storms and a connection to the Spren that feels very natural. And I think that was always like one of my favorite parts of it.
They're just such a unique fantasy race. We joke about them being crab elves, but they're really their own thing. And it's exciting. Because like I love me some of the standard Tolkien races, but it's also exciting to see new things.
And we hadn't really got too many alien races from Brandon in his books. Like there were some, but they were all like kind of human derived ultimately from other books that he had written. And this was the first like, okay, Brandon's doing like an alien race that we're going to see. And I thought he did a really good job.
I guess totally different topic. I wanted to bring up the diagram because that's a big reveal in this book. It's easy to kind of, I guess, forget that amongst the excitement of the ending and all the other kind of like big crazy things that happen. But the diagram is really cool. And I don't know, like Tarvangian had a big like twist at the end of Way of Kings. And it's really funny to me that like Brandon found a way to like double up and like make that even that much deeper, that much more to Tarvangian and what he's doing. And I also just want to give a shout out to the diagram epigraphs, because those are probably my favorite epigraphs that Brandon has done. They're just so like, I don't know. It's just a creative idea to like give these like crazy prophecies that are, scribed on pieces of furniture that, are super cryptic, and some of them are decipherable. Some of them are just strings of numbers. It's just so eclectic and weird. I love it.
Oh yeah. And like, helping, like even like putting in the dates of the high storms, to like help build a timeline in there. Like it is kind of like a Stormlight fan's dream to really dig into. I will always, I wish I could remember who it was, but it's been so many years. Whoever the person is that wrote the forum post that was, I think Taravangian's intelligence fluctuates on a daily basis, and that's his secret. Before Words of Radiance came out, you are a genius. I do not remember who it was, but like they literally read His Majesty's Mind on a strong day and the end of the Way of Kings and what Taravangian had gotten there, and they wrote exactly what was going on with him. And I was blown away.
The Taravangi interlude was also one of the readings Brandon did beforehand.
Was it?
It was. And like, but not the entire thing. It kind of ended at the something, like a man whose intelligence fluctuates per day. So it's like that we did get that reveal a little ahead of the book. But yeah, it's like, I can remember that being a theory, and then like getting the confirmation of like, oh, Taravangian is crazy. He's not crazy. I mean, he is crazy, but like, it's just such an interesting situation.
I do have a diagram related complaint. What is the deal with Graves? Like, who's this like random guy that has a shard blade that like, it's just so weird to me that there's like this Alethi guy that has a shard blade and nobody seems to know who he is. I guess we just never see him interact. Maybe he's like this like big guy and it's one of the houses, and just like nobody ever talks about him. I don't know.
Is he Alethi? Do we know that for sure?
He is, because he calls himself a patriot.
Okay. Okay. That makes in my head, he's got one of the lost shard blades that Brandon seems to think are a dime a dozen. So it's just not a known blade.
But he also has shard plate, I believe.
That's true. That was a big resource expenditure by the organization of the diagram.
Yeah. Like I've always figured he was a super minor shard bearer, like, because we only focus on the shard bearers like for the duels of the high princes that are directly opposed to Dalinar. But most of the High Princes are the peacemakers that are like not getting involved. So he's probably in one of their camps. I don't think he has like secret shards.
Oh, I do.
I just don't think he's not an important person, so nobody cares about him.
Yeah, I don't think
He's
you
a
can be
shard
a
bearer.
full shard bearer
Yeah.
and not be an important person.
Yeah.
He's fourth on minimum. And no, I think it's a secret. Taravangian has a lot of resources. And so I think that he has rustled up a plate and a blade that are not well known. Graves is an unimportant noble. What kind of I have to always struggle to kind of hold in my brain is that Graves is trying to kill Elhokar to make Dalinar the king. And Taravangian, separately, also in the diagram, is trying to kill Dalinar. And so they are really working in opposition. And I can accept Brandon's explanation that like one hand doesn't always know what the other hand is doing. And there's a moment from Graves later where he's kind of like, it seems like he's sort of working, he's trying to separate Kaladin from Dalinar at the end. Although I don't really know what his plan is if Dalinar and Elhokar both die, if he's trying to put Adolin on the throne or what.
Yeah.
But
it's an interesting thing because the followers of the diagram, like the diagram was this thing that Taravangian wrote on his smartest day ever. And it's ever since like people are trying to interpret the diagram. And so like obviously Taravangian has his interpretation, other people have their interpretation on things. And I think that's encouraged by the organization.
See, that just seems so weird to me, though. Like, I'm surprised Taravangian, being the guy he is, isn't like, this is the interpretation and you will obey me, you know?
It's weird using humility to describe Taravangian, so I'm not going to use it. I think it's more hedging his bets. Like, sure, like he thinks his interpretation is correct, but he knows how astronomically smart he was on that day and how less smart he is now, that there is that chance that other interpretations are more valid. Because I have to assume that they've made mistakes. Like they've interpreted something, did an action, and then like in retrospect it's like, oh wait, because of this other thing that happened, we did the wrong thing there.
I believe that could easily be the case, although it'd be hard to confirm. But in my mind, even if you're not 100% sure, if you don't have a strategic plan for what you're going to do, other people are going to do things that will conflict with your personal plans. Even if it's the wrong plan, I think it's better to have one plan than 7 plans. But yeah, I will say ultimately that Taravangian's goal was to cause chaos in Alethkar so he could sweep in and do the same Yakaved thing that he did. And if you kill the king and the king's uncle, the whole nation falls apart because some people want to put Elhokar's son on the throne. I'm sure some people want to put Adolin on the throne. Some people want to be on the throne themselves. And I will accept that would effectively destroy the nation to do both. But Graves just really seemed like he wanted to put Dalinar on the throne. Maybe he's a liar. I don't know.
Oh, I believe Graves when he says he wanted Dalinar on the throne.
But then he kept Kaladin away so Szeth could go kill him. So but he was overridden, I think, in that instance. It seemed to be that Taravangian had said, we're doing this one. Listen up.
Yeah, and I don't think Graves would have been informed that. I mean,
there's a line that I think, that I think implies, he says something along the lines of like, we're allowed to pursue our own projects up to a point. So, or something, a paraphrase of that.
I mean, he can kill Elhokar and make Dalinar the king, and then like Szeth can still come in and kill Dalinar if that's what Taravangian wants to do. So it's not like even necessarily in direct conflict, other than what he hopes will happen.
Yeah, and maybe he thinks, okay, maybe Dalinar's king and it does work out, and we don't have to kill him. But I'm sure Taravangian isn't sending a mass email going, by the way, we've gone ahead with the Dalinar assassination. Everybody, you should be aware.
Final thoughts?
This book is awesome. But that's the final thought for like all the books, because all the books are awesome.
I think that every book in Stormlight has something that like gives it like a little special place in my heart. Otherwise, I wouldn't be spending so much time talking about it all the time. But I think that this book will always on some level be my favorite, just because this was when I really, really like Way of Kings. Way of Kings is my first brand book, so that's something else entirely. But this book was when I felt like I knew what Stormlight was going to be like, and when I really was like in for the long haul.
You mentioned like how you knew what Stormlight was going to be like. I always kind of felt like the first book that I was around for the release of was Oathbringer, and I always kind of felt like Oathbringer was a really hard turn for the series. Yeah, and in some ways it is, but on this reread, it felt less dramatic than it was in my memory. There's a lot of feelings that I associate more with Oathbringer that I actually did feel like started to kind of. I saw seeds of them, and I saw kind of the books moving that way in Words of Radiance. So it's a nice evolution from the Way of Kings to kind of where the series is going from here, I think. And I enjoyed it. It was a fun read. So good time.
Yeah, because I know it was definitely surprising that we're just wrapping up the entire Shattered Plains arc in this book. Okay, did not expect that. Yeah, or like we are now in Urithiru at the end of book 2.
Yeah, that was it for me. I remember writing the Urithiru article for the Coppermind at post Way of Kings, and there were like 7 sentences on it, and I was like, well, this is gonna be like when they find it, it's gonna be so cool. I wonder when that'll be. And it was book 2.
Well, thank you for watching. You can find us at 17shard.com for all the news, discussion, theories, and fun that you could ever want. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud. You can leave us a review on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube, and you can also support us on Patreon. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Peace.